It's a great pleasure and honor for me to present this lecture at your International Congress. It's the first one, yes, on Intermidialidade, something like that in Portuguese. So, before starting with my brief comments, I must confess that your Congress was so stimulating with so many papers, panels, posters, arguments and propositions, which I unfortunately only understood partly, but I did my best, I tried my best. So that it is impossible for me to wrap them all up. If I had a keynote, I wouldn't do it. Yeah. So the only possibility for me will be to make one or the other aside concerning one or the other aspect which has been elaborated during the last 3 days. And I will just show you. Oh, this is a bigger problem.
Just click on this.
Yeah, but it just, but we also try. No, go down. Strange, huh? No? Okay, thank you very much. So, just to give you a short idea of the steps I would like to undertake, I don't now go into detail and talk about every chapter. Maybe just a brief remark. I would like to thank my staff at the University of Bayreuth, because being a professor in media studies, as you've noticed, I'm always very good at that. So without them, I would have never been able to make that kind of PowerPoint, or also the videos I'm going to show. So I have to thank you very much for that support, and also giving me advice which clips might be useful. So in order to start with my enterprise, I would like to come to quo vadis, that is to say, to a short clip from a famous film of the 1950s without sound. So let's try again. Fine. Please do not conclude from this introduction that I am an amateur of monumental film, of spoof desert epics, which I had to learn for this paper, but maybe of Peter Ustinov. However, I think that this sequence might direct our attention towards some options of the manifold paths and approaches of intermediality. We could see and hear an intertextually and intermedially reloaded remix of sound and image, and it's based on the book, as we all know, an interplay of representations of insanity and presumptuous aesthetic standards, a remediation of histories, of devastating and renewing fires, etc. Let us hope that in order to develop future paths for the concept of intermediality, we will not have to burn down metropolises of intermediate research, such as which until today have been erected by a great number of scholars. At least I shall try not to be as brutal and pretentious as Nero, and I will also not try to sing. Some remarks about the current state of affairs of intermedialities. The variety of aspects of the concept of intermediality makes it very difficult or almost impossible to present a general overview with regard to all research options. Today, I will not venture in such complex enterprise, which, as we know and have heard, has already been done in a very interesting way by Klaus Grüber on the first day of this outstanding Congress, and has been endeavored by several scholars who who offer critical volumes on intermediate research or typologies of different sorts of intermediate studies. For example, recently Irina Gajewski has published a useful overview on intermediality. It's an article on intermediality remediation of multimedia. Jens Schröter proposed the typology of intermediality as synthetical, transmedial, and transformational, ontological, etc. I will also not repeat my own remarks, because otherwise it would really get too long, my own remarks on the history of the notion and concept of intermediality, and shall instead focus on some general aspects of the current state of affairs of this research axis. For me and more scholars, and I'm sure also for Klaus Kühler, Lars Elster, and naturally also for Daniela and João, intermediality does not imply the striving for one closed theory, but the development of several relevant axes of research, or axes de pertinence in the sense of Roger Audin, which offer different perspectives for intermediate studies. In this sense, the former struggles between different opposing approaches have, fortunately, changed into a controversial but productive discussion of the usefulness of certain positions. Thus, the various configurations of intermediality and its methodological applications have fostered complementary relationships between these lines. Taxonomic models, we have also talked about that, and diagrams of intermediate relationships and studies, for example, can give good insights into the various dimensions of intermediate processes. And they promote specific questions of historical research, which in return challenge these taxonomies. It is before this background that I would like to present my proposals. The in-between of intermediality asks for another in-between, that is, for interdisciplinarity. The intermediate research of complex processes between traditional media, let's take literature as traditional, I apologize, traditional media as literature, more or less analog and linear media, such as cinema, radio, television, and so-called new and digital media, entails various interdisciplinary perspectives and offers the potential to further develop the methodological toolbox of intermediate approaches. If, for example, we wanted to study intermediate configurations of blogs, which also was one of the topics of this Congress, we would soon realize that neither approaches of literary studies nor semiotics alone can suffice in order to cope with the complex, interdependent processes of this digital phenomenon. In this case, we would have to refer to a combination of traditional tools and new tools for media studies in order to get closer to the spatial-temporal processes of blogs. Intermediality does not present a completely new academic concept, rather it is a reaction to certain historical circumstances in the humanities, the media landscapes and the arts, which manifest itself on various levels such as mentalities, academic and social structures, technology, economy, politics, etc. It could be conceived as an answer to 19th century academic and institutional heritage at our universities and as a starting point for repositioning of scholars and corresponding research in a situation of, I quote Cicero, of decline of the academic world, If this provocative thesis proved to be correct, a historical axe de pertinence, research axis of intermediate studies, would be an option to fight this decline. In my eyes, intermediate research can and shall be directed towards historical processes of media encounters and their historical functions, which have left their traces, also naturally in the materialities. In the materialities and the dispositives, the media products or other artifacts and practices. This intermediate history, I get to some examples very, very quickly, don't worry, because I prepared quite a series of slides. Okay, so this history of this approach would have to be conceived as a network and rhizomatic history, oscillating between the poles of technology, cultural series, historical mentalities, and, not to forget, social practices. It would thus lead us to an innovative understanding of the processes of media development. Following the above-mentioned idea of a toolbox, naturally Klaus Tügel's semiological and historical approach of inter-art studies and Lars Elström, I like it very much, medium-centered model of communication, would and should be, could be regarded as central vectors of these historical interplays. However, for me, the functional concept of intermediality, relating media to social, cultural, and historical processes, still seems to be one of the most promising frameworks for intermediate research. A network history of intermediality might thus help us to develop profiles of modalities, and of historical functions of intermediate processes, ranging from specific patterns of aesthetic experience of the recipient to patterns of action and behavior of individuals or certain groups related to intermediate processes of certain dispositive or you could also say apparatus, but I don't like that term very much. So now it's more or less over with this sort of rather heavy introduction, a little bit too Teutonic, but I know on a Friday afternoon after 4 days of Congress. But let us now take a glance at some challenges and options of a networked and networking history of intermedia in the digital era, which will be the focus of my lecture. So, the question, or the main question would be, intermediality quo vadis in the digital era. And I will make a rather brief and short introductory remark and also quote, I think, a rather interesting person, which, by the way, has also been mentioned. Okay, as I proposed some years ago, I do not believe that intermedialities or intermediate processes will disappear or have already disappeared in the general virtuality of our digital universe. I do not believe that. Media concepts of media genres, of media borders, still are present as ideas, imaginations, remediations, and images in a somewhat dematerialized form in almost all digital media artifacts and formats. Naturally, they do not stick to their old analog patterns or processes and are transformed. However, they play a central role in our making of meaning. Sorry, Lars, I still make use of the term of meaning. I think about the alternative. Okay, so let me quote Franz Kafka, who had already been mentioned, one of the visionaries of modernity and postmodernity. I did discover this only recently, by the way, by chance in the journal, Spiegel, 6 weeks ago. Okay, so 1922, Kafka wrote in a letter to his admired journalist friend, girlfriend Milena Eschenska, and now in German, and we'll read the English text below. Geschriebene Küsse kommen nicht an ihren Ort. Sorry. No, that's it. Must watch out. Stay sort of synchronized. Okay. Starting again. Geschriebene Küsse kommen nicht an ihren Ort, sondern werden von den Gespensten auf dem Weg ausgetrocknet. And then he continues in this letter. These ghosts have been invented. The post, it's 1922, huh? The post, the telegraph, the telephone, radio, telegraph. So that's Kafka, 1922, to his go. In our historical context of the many international big brothers such as NSA and Google, Kafka's greedy ghosts very often are interpreted as modern and postmodern institutions and procedures of total control, of the abuse of data, and more or less emotional and erotic too, messages. However, from an intermediate perspective of media transformation and media networks, we might read this letter as a hint to the inevitable losses which accompany the transfer of messages, formats, signs of affections, etc. in media networks. If we take media transformation as one of the genuine fields of research of intermediate studies, that's what happens to element contents or cognitive imports. I noted down as cognitive imports, which are transmitted in analog and digital networks. We would consider, so if we take these transformations, etc., that would happen to these elements, would constitute a highly relevant axe de pertinence research axis. Almost 100 years after the composing and sending of this media reflexive letter, Kafka's vision still seems to be quite up to date. This quote should give way to some proposals for possible paths of intermediate research in the age of worldwide network rhizomes, which, as we tend to forget, so far have not expanded all over the globe, Africa, etc. So I always like to mention this fact. So let us keep in mind that I will focus on analog and digital media, and that I do not intend to develop a typology of future intermediate research. I will not offer typology. Rather, I would like to propose 6 axes of research, 6 axes de pertinence. So I'm resynchronized again. Transformation of remediation of media networks, even if nowadays the concept of networks might have become a somewhat worn out and empty metaphor. There are many indications that it still is a valuable and complementary perspective for intermediate research. We just had a short discussion about that yesterday. So networks, and here I quote Castells, it's an old quote, but anyway I still think it's useful. So networks seem to constitute the new social morphology of our societies, and the diffusion of networking logic substantially modifies the operation and outcomes in processes of production, experience, power and culture, and naturally also media. So not only in the rhizomatic ramifications of the internet, they are central factors of our cultures and societies, which are present in the fields of languages and media, but also, and that's important for us, also with regard to, let's say, perspectives of intermediate research, but also in the fields of economies, technologies, social and juridical systems. Only to mention the most prominent. Before this background, an intermediate network history of audiovisual and digital media would have to focus on interactions between technological, ideological, where people from law and economy, history, etc., and informatics, not to forget, are taking part with regard to that kind of research. Okay, so this network history would, for example, focus on periods of implementations, transitions, and institutionalizations of light media, or so-called leading media or key media, such as, for example, television in the first half of the 20th century and television in the second decade of the 21st century, where, by the way, we would find many comparable processes. For example, a strive for interactivity between users and producers, and the installation of consumers as active co-producers of value or content. Remembering Kafka's greedy ghosts, we would have to ask ourselves what happens to remediated kisses. What happens to remediated kisses on their trips in the media networks and on the spots of their remediation. And in order to wake you up a little bit, give the fact this rather boring presentation, I prepared a series of kisses. at least enough of audiovisual kisses. Obviously, the greedy ghosts of the 21st century do not only drink up kisses, but they also remediate, restage, and recontextualize. In this perspective, we have not only been witnesses of a cross-media history or story of kisses, but of an intermediate transformation and refunctionalization. Apart from a media culture history of audiovisual kissing, which would have to include such simple categories as duration, methods of kissing, gender combinations, and not to forget historical patterns of censorship, we would have to stay aware of medial, social, political, and economic factors. In the age of media plenitude and alter, we face a complex state of affairs with a variety of networks, of media transformations and remediations. By the way, lads, maybe later we could talk about the relationship between chain and network. Because economists, they like to talk about, let's say, profit chains, and now they get so far also to implement networks of profit. Huh? So, okay, in terms of changing from linearities to somewhat, okay, what's it? Okay, so even if during the past decades there has been a strong tendency in media studies to neglect content or genre, in favor of materialities or dispositives, I would like to stay old-fashioned and make a plea for the integration of the category of content or something else in intermediate studies in order to meet the challenge of analog or digital materialities and the making of meaning. This will be the first of my 6 proposed possible future paths for intermediality. And don't worry, I shall speed up. I must speed up. I got a sign. A very sharp and hard sign. Genreifications. Please excuse my neologisms, but I thought that they would be in a sort of between level between, let's say, general semiotic theory and historical aspects. So I would like to call it genreifications. If we regard genres as an interlink, or genres in general as interlinked systems, this implies various interplays of formalist, structural, and not to forget economic categories, as well as patterns of labeling and remembrance and of action within the complex system of media production and reception we all know. They function as commodities for producers and users. They guarantee a certain security with regard to our expectations, our horizons of expectation, and they provide a guideline with regard to the economic and aesthetic decisions of the producers and consumers. Let us now take a glance at the current digital phenomenon. I deliberately call it phenomenon, but we might maybe also consider it as a sort of hybrid genre, which plays with several genre patterns. And I'm glad there have also been several papers on blogs, so I will show you this blog. I hope it can be seen at least to some extent. Only 2 sentences about that. So Sieberberg is one, let's say, of sort of very special, maybe even marginalized German authors, writers, directors of films. Cinema, he did that sort of famous scandalous film, at least in Germany, Hitler, you might remember, and many things. Yeah? And what happened now, I think since about 8 to 10 years, when he had the chance to return to his former home, let's say the former GDR, that's Mossendorf, he opened this blog, where you can find many, many elements, now of rebuilding his old house, his farm, but also talking about guests he had, taking a picture of the project, but also taking a picture of guests which have been invited. One of my former students has been in some way. So anyway, so this is only, and also not to forget, selling his films and material. So there's only one side where you have now sort of links to the economic aspect, but they're naturally very, very strong economical background in this sense. Okay, so just, this has been taken a couple of days ago, so it's rather recent. Sieberberg, I could give you a link later. You would find it under Sieberberg. Yeah? And so, just one example of a blog, which I find quite interesting with regard to, let's say, the phenomena I tried to describe before. So let's go on and not to be too slow. So this example hopefully made clear that in intermediate generic terms, the historical development of blogs is to be characterized by an interaction between various genre patterns. This would be my point, because I still would like to keep genre within that sort of discourse of intermediate. So blogs imply digital remediations of generic traditions, naturally of autobiographical writing, for example, of the many ways of representing aspect of one's imagined self. He still imagines himself, and he poses actually. But he also shows pictures of his childhood, or even photo apparatuses, which by chance he found in his old house, but his ruined house, etc. So, next point, autobiographical text presuppose the presence of an alter ego or of the other. Okay, we'll talk in great detail about St. Augustine or Rousseau and the famous readers. So in this sense, they are present, but in another way, because their presence takes a much more immediate form and also influence. Next point, blogs recycle, reactivate, and play on functional patterns of traditional literary genres, also naturally of intimate genres, the cahiers intimes in the French tradition, genre of les bandes, of diaries and other traditional literary genres, just to mention a few others which play a role here in the context of Silverberg's blog, for example, travel novels, also reports, political pamphlets, not to forget, photo albums, etc. So we can see how all these generic patterns are sort of remixed, and they constitute, these blogs, intermediate plays with the memory of basic functions of these genres, with the memory of these functions. And so by this, they can, for example, play with construct of youth or the construct of stable identities, etc., etc. And there could even be something like, in the French tradition, baromètre de l'âme, which I always like very much, a barometer of our soul. Blogs as barometers of our soul, for quoting more or less Jürgen, one of the most important French theoreticians on let's say, autobiographies, and naturally also blogs do something. Okay, so in the case of Silverberg, we can see that blogs can be conceived of as complex generic interplays with one or the most successful and many other genres. By the way, Jean-Louis has written at Bayreuth a book on blogs, on African blogs and their function. So, this historical category of genre would and could be used for the study of a whole variety of social functions, ranging from support or structuring of specific processes of making meaning, to the bargaining of cultural values and norms, to blueprints for generic productions and formats, to negotiations of shared pleasures, and not to forget economic evaluations. It is thanks to these generic processes that our horizon of expectation, Erwartungshorizonte in the German context, can meet with surprising horizons in the process of permanent hybrid developments that lead to the innovations of media and literary genres. So an intermediate historiography of genres might thus turn out to be rather useful perspectives that should lead us to integrative media research. And now I will get to the next point. To interactivations and augmented realities, as I told you, I will focus mostly on digital aspect. It is a commonplace of communication media studies that the digital era of the 21st century has brought about a remarkable intensification of interactive options for producers and prosumers on different levels. I deliberately speak of intensification because in my eyes it would be rather naive to believe that interactivity is a new phenomenon of our century in this field. A short glance at the history of serial novels in 19th century France, for example, Zola or other poets, proves that interaction between readers and writers have been a common phenomenon in this period. However, in the age of media plenitude, the immediacy of the feedback and the possibilities of the user or producer have considerably increased. These new processes could and should be a genuine field of intermediate studies. Let me briefly illustrate this idea, referring to two current media practices. A, augmented realities, and B, fan activities. So I switch to augmented realities first. After that, I give you a very brief comment on that. And I think, yeah, I learned how to handle it. Okay, this is an augmented sculpture which has been produced and projected whatsoever at the Four Seasons Hotel in Bayreuth. That's why I emphasized Bayreuth. Not to get confused, it was not taken not at Bayreuth, but in Bayreuth in Lebanon. And I think it's a very, very interesting example for some kinds of processes at Bayreuth, which could be of interest for intermediate studies. So, augmented reality as a technology, as we all know, that superimposes computer-generated images on the user's view of the real world, thus providing a composite view, presupposes complex intermediate processes and interactions between our perception of the real, physical world, collective imaginary dimension of our cultural background, and virtual pictures and sounds. Following this line, augmentation can be reconceptualized as an idea and cultural and aesthetic practice rather than as technological category. So, as a practice, I would like to conceive of that. Even, it's a quote from Müller, the last part of this sentence. So, even if nowadays we might ask ourselves whether its impact on our media societies will be as prominent as it has been prophesied some years ago, there are many indications that this phenomenon will become an essential part of our future mixed and hybrid realities. That's the point where intermediality should come into play. Central question of this relevant future intermediate path in the jungles of mixed realities would, for example, be relationships of current augmented productions with historical dispositives such as 18th and 19th century panoramas. Huh? It's not that new, but you all know these panoramas. You walk around, also we're chatting in many European countries, even close to my hometown in Bavaria. I think nobody would expect that battlefields, for example, whatsoever. Yeah? You walk around and really have the illusion of being part, of that event, but also of that space and time. So, in other words, panoramas and their relationship with developments of, let's say, like we have seen, augmented realities, the historical development of holy aesthetics, as, for example, Maria Engberg does it, the intermediate constitution of immersive experiences, the intermediate constitution of immersive experiences, and historical and design redefinitions of space as a combination of sight, hearing, touch, and proprioception. We all know how space might be constituted. So, as already mentioned above, let us also briefly direct our attention towards a second form of interactivations in the age of media plenitude, fan activities. So this will be somewhat different, and I show you, okay, that what our technicians, that I had to thank people in the staff, prepared for it. Can be postmodern, so it can be very eclectic. I continue. Fan activities. From the very beginnings, fan activities did involve media transformations in various intermedia processes. However, in the age of internet, they not only gained a much larger visibility and attention, apart from that, these practices experienced an acceleration and a remarkable expansion of network activities and remediations of single fan and fan groups. There are many reasons to believe that fans will get more and more involved in intermedia productions of specific audiovisuals, the term is from Zelinsky, of specific audiovisuals or TV series. These intermedia activities should be refocused in terms of typical patterns of fandom and fan practices. A thorough historical study of the development of these interactivations would link intermedia research to social, political, and economic processes in our modern or postmodern societies. And as you see, also, I'm too fast. No, yet. Next chapter, gamification. In our current media landscape, games prove to be one of the fastest growing phenomena. The two stills, one of which is a picture taken from a helmet camera spread in the internet in the Syrian war, as you will see, and the other from a first-person shooter game, are quite instructive examples of intermedia gamification processes. The pictures produced by the head camera are not only to be linked to generic patterns and modes of reception of direct news, but also to socialized points of view of first-person shooting games. In these games, the player-user has to solve a series of problems, such as eliminating, look at that yesterday, all-star fighters, exterminating aliens or superhuman monsters. The individual actions and moves in the game are thus predetermined by a set of variables and rules that enable the players to choose from a bandwidth of various options of action. This allows them to experience and finally conclude the game in their more or less own manner. An internet or TV live version of this genre of first-person shooting games or of other games, it's not really shooting, you should notice soon, transforms their configurative principles into another configuration and form of narrative and hybrid, almost augmented realities. Remembering our aforementioned three axes of intermedia, research, transformation, genreifications, and interactivations, it is evident that gamification has become a central vector of media production and reception. Nowadays, news is not only produced as infotainment, which has been normal since about 20-30 years, but it is also remediated by many procedures of gamification. Let me show a second striking example. This is an excerpt from a German TV's new program, RTL2, reporting on an airplane crash, which happened, I think, it's already 6 or 7 years ago. And we shortened, so our technician worked on it, because the thing is,
Vermutlich kam es im Inneren zu einem Druckabfall, in der Maschine wurde der Sauerstoff knapp, es stiegen die Dämpfe auf. Noch ist unklar, warum der Sauerstoff knapp wurde. Das System muss eigentlich regelmäßig überprüft werden. Als der Treibstoff verbraucht war, stürzte die Maschine ab. Die Wrackteile schleuderten mehrere hundert Meter weit. Die Maschine war nach dem Aufprall explodiert, ein Feuer brach aus. Weil die Piloten ohnmächtig geworden waren, kreiste die Boeing 737 führerlos in der Luft. Die Boeing 737 war heute Morgen in Larnaca auf Zypern gestartet und auf dem Weg nach Prag. Als die Nachricht vom Absturz der Boeing 737 bekannt wird, brechen Ehefrauen und Mütter am Flughafen von Larnaca weinen zusammen.
okay. I will spare us a detailed comment on the intended effects of this gamified news, gamified news, which literally brings us down to the final crash of the plane. Instead, I would like to conclude this chapter of possible future paths for intermediate research with a remark on a central research perspective. Remediating the manifold digital game patterns in TV news obviously embraces highly complex intermediate processes which lead, among other things, to a reduction of numerous game patterns in order to constitute a coherent narrative form, in our case of a disaster, while playing with the fascination and thrill of the topos or the theme of disaster. A reconstruction of the historical function of such kind of interplays would be, for me, a relevant field for future intermediate research. Oh, sorry. I have been too late. Anyway, so I know where now. Okay, the next chapter, televisualizations of the internet. Sorry for the terms. I had to think about that too. For the term. So televisualizations of the internet versus internetifications of the television. You will soon, I think, get what I would like to say. Currently, the light medium, whether it's the question whether television still is the key medium. I think it isn't anymore. So the former key medium television and several platforms of the web are experiencing dramatic changes with regard to the profiles of the dispositif. So I just give you a chance to get a better view of this example, which I prepared. Oh, sorry.
Present.
It's too early. Well, strange example. You know what it is? Big Brother camera watching Big Brother people. The other one is a bird watching camera on the internet watching birds. So Big Brother, I'm trying to sort of bring it together. So Big Brother, on the other side, these processes are internet webcams. So here they are again. Starting from the assumption that television has been from its very beginning on an amalgam. That's what Vidal, 19th century, wrote what was novel, Le 20e siècle, sort of novel describing life in Paris of 1950, Utopia novel. Yeah? So, Vidal, television didn't exist in 18, thank you very much. I shall hope. Getting faster and faster, and we're going to be to follow it. Okay, so for Vidal, 1985, something like that, television was an idea concept. He called it an amalgam. So for Vidal, television has been an amalgam of different media and concepts, but not an addition of these media which interact in specific media networks at that time. For Vidal, in this utopia of television. So starting from this assumption, another path of intermediate research might focus on the relevance, social and technological functions of historical imaginations or ideas of television for the next generations of so-called television, whether television might still be television or be called television. Television is competing with internet platforms such as Netflix and many others for its old features of liveness and its new option for collectivity, interactivity, and gamification. In intermediate terms, it can be regarded as symptomatic that digital platforms often try to remediate well-established and nostalgic TV formats. TV formats are digital platforms, and that TV in exchange tries to get as close as possible to the 19th century desire of interactive television, which Robert, for example, described in his book. In this sense, intermediate research would have to tackle the dispositif or the apparatus of future television by linking technological aspects, etc., also cloud technologies, and so on, to interactions between internet platforms and television. And it has to take into account ideas of imaginations of media identities and functions in general, and of television in special. The central question will be how these ideas of old and new media interfere with patterns of media production and of media usage, and of how they can influence the actions of producers and users. So main categories of research are, as already mentioned, to be taken from theories of social memory, media archaeology, remediation, participation, liveness, genres, forms, gamification, and not to forget semiotics and semiology. I would be more on the side of semiology, some are on the side of semiotics, but I don't see any big, great differences. So this fifth research axis will approach the question of the role of historical actual desires and imaginations with regard to new forms of television and the technological state of affairs. It will give insight into the social, technological, and so on functions and assumptions of television. For example, that's very strange to me in this sense, and also very old-fashioned, related to wishes for a stable medium for couch potatoes. I sometimes enjoy very much when I come home late to switch on television, and I completely change into that old-fashioned pattern of a couch potato, and then I do not want to get interactive at all anymore after a long day with many hours of work. Okay, anyway, or naturally the other option of gamified or interactive options of television. Okay, so I would now finish this aspect with, very briefly, with another option of this sort of new possibilities for interactivities, I think, which is also quite interesting. I will not tell you what it is about, but I think it might be quite illustrative. No?
Prison Valley is a journey deep into the corrections industry in Canyon City, Colorado, a town of 36,000 residents and 6,000 convicts. The creators of Prison Valley have combined video, photos, audio interviews and interactive elements. The members of the jury say they were engrossed by the documentary. Beyond the story of Canyon City, the web documentary also gives viewers the chance to relive the journalist's process. Prison Valley questions the American way of detention, but the French authors hope it will inspire a debate in their home country as well.
Okay, Prison Valley. Here is also still for Prison Valley. Let us shortly come back to the social, technological, and cultural, praxeological convergence with regard to intermediate documentary formats. Let's skip everything. Prison Valley combines non-fictional audiovisual production with traditional television and mobile second screen devices. As Anna Wiel, also from the University of Bayreuth, has shown, television is to be found in a phase where interactivity, participation and networking practices have become key terms in order to scholarly study new hybrid media applications. It's a very strange thing. I didn't really watch it all the time. It's from Arty, but you can build up your own documentary of Vision Valley in interactive terms. Okay, so the last chapter, I know I'm very bad at economy, that's why I can accelerate too. Unfortunately, you already see the sheet. Okay, in the area of media networks, I think it does make sense, or we should even try to get closer to the economies of intermediality. In Schroeder, he pleaded for sort of politics of intermediality. I think that's not very far from his proposal. I think that economy also has to play a very, very important role, because normally as scholars of humanities, we tend to forget. So there are also in economy some scholars who try to now link media convergences to economic processes, but I think the problem is that they do not really cope with categories I tried to mention, such as genre or whatsoever. So I think this would be also a very, very promising or also necessary path we would have to go. We could, for example, make use of Bourdieu's proposal, of symbolic capital, etc., or other proposals, or for example, the so-called proposals of economies of attention, And I will just stick to the time. Just give you, don't worry. I'll just give you another example. It's almost the last one of the economy. I hope that I will find here. Yeah. Aspect of economy. We all know Michael Jackson's Thriller and the video and the history and so on. And we also know that, I checked this, I checked it yesterday. It was one of my works I did because it meant it. You will get on Google 900,000 hits for Thriller, Michael Jackson. And on YouTube, 14,200,000 hits. And then in these hits you will find poems on Thriller, you find other clips on Thriller, you find comments, you will find marching bands doing the moonwalk, etc. And I just would like to give you one example, I will comment on that further.